live now online as of last night. If you visit it, you'll find that it's a resource for Orthodox Christian service members, all the different services. Basically, it provides wisdom from experts in the field, chaplains, priests who have been around the block for a while, training materials, simple things like how to perform an akathist, how to do different types of prostrations, what are cassocks, what purpose do they serve, simple things like that. Also a podcast by a 5-time deployed chaplain, Father George Hill. It's called War Priest. Links to that are on there as well. And we're also in the process of trying to put together a ruggedized field expedient pocket prayer book with prayers for specifically Orthodox Christian service members. So if you are former military or if you know someone in the military at this time who's Orthodox, the numbers are growing everywhere, online in parishes and cities and in the military installations around the world. Please let them know about the Faithful Centurion. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Okay, Father Gabriel, Father John, building Orthodox parishes in the South from end to end, Virginia and Texas. Thank you.
So both of us are ROCOR priests. One thing I would just note at the beginning is that in different jurisdictions, the way missions get started are very different. In the Antiochian Archdiocese, they know the business side of the church as well as anybody does, and they tend to do things on a big scale, but the downside of that is that they're a little less flexible in terms of starting a small mission where an opportunity presents itself. There was an Antiochian priest in Houston that I was in his office when he was talking about getting ready to build the big church that they built. This is St. Joseph's. And he was telling me that Bishop Basil told him, okay, we got to line up these numbers of donors and raise this amount of money. And he went down this long list of very practical business sense things that Bishop Basil was telling me needed to do. And I was thinking in ROCOR, the bishop would say, well, if you think you can do it, God bless. But the downside is in ROCOR, they'll give you the opportunity, but they don't give you much in the way of help. So basically what I'm going to talk about is starting a parish from scratch. Some of what I will talk about, though, really applies no matter what kind of a parish that you're in. But if you're starting a parish from scratch, I would say at a minimum you need about 3 families. Ideally, you have someone who's either already a clergyman or is a potential clergyman. And it would help if you had someone who knew how to chant the services, because even if you're in a very small environment, if the services are sung well, it's going to make a big difference on people. Our parish got started in my house, in a bedroom in my house, and one thing I learned is that most people are not going to come to services in somebody's house. When I would have people call me up and I would describe how to get there and tell them it was a house, I often never saw them actually come. But basically, what I discovered is that there are certain kinds of humps that you have to get over when you're starting a parish, and one of those humps was getting out of my house and getting into a storefront. When we got into a storefront, which was, the first one was only 600 square feet, the fact that it was a storefront, though, gave it more credibility, and we actually started to grow a lot more when we got in there. And we were in that storefront for about 3 years. And then we where we started renting a much larger storefront that was like 2,400 square feet. And then eventually we had the people and the money to start looking to buy property, and we were able to buy our current church. We bought a piece of property that had a house and a barn on it, so not a church, but we knocked walls out in the house, and we used that for services initially. I thought it would probably take us a lot longer to get to the phase where we'd build the church, but about 2 years later, we were able to build the church that we're using now, and now we need to expand our current church or build a brand new one, which we're probably going to do the expansion first just because of all the regulations we've been dealing with in terms of Harris County. But there are a couple of very practical things that you have to keep in mind in terms of getting a parish going, and one of them is being consistent. If you have services when you're feeling like it, but then you just cancel services on a whim, you're not going to have people continue to come to a parish, because if the one time someone visits your parish, there's a sign on the door that says, we're not having services today, we went all over to the big church, or we went on a pilgrimage or something like that, chances are really good that person's never going to visit your parish again because they took the time out, they came to your church. Someone compared it to a parish is kind of like a train. You might not want to ride the train today, you might not want to ride it tomorrow, but when you want to ride the train, you expect that it's going to be running on schedule. Or when you open up the refrigerator, you expect the light bulb to come on. And so you have to be dependable. And really, building your parish around the services is very important because the services are so beautiful. The beauty of the services alone will attract people and cause them to want to become Orthodox. When first Orthodox service I attended was in a very small storefront with carpet that was falling apart and had rust stains on the ceiling tiles, but the singing was fairly well done, and I thought it was very beautiful. And had it been Three Cats in a Bag, I don't know what my response might have been. But it wasn't the beauty of the exterior building. So these are things that you can overcome. And one thing I noticed was when we got into our property that we're in now, we still had almost no Russians or Ukrainians that were coming to our parish. It was when we built the church with an onion dome on top, and then people, and having now been to Russia twice and Moldova twice, when you see how beautiful churches are in traditionally Orthodox countries, you could understand why someone who's from that environment would see a storefront and say, that's not a church, I'm not going to bother going there. But when they see something that looks like a church, they started coming. And now, probably around 30% of the people we have in our parish are either Russian or Ukrainian. We also have Lebanese and some Greeks and stuff. But we have a lot of converts, and we're really running out of room. Another thing to keep in mind is just in terms of maintaining good hospitality. We always did a meal after the liturgy, and I know a lot of parishes will just do coffee hour or maybe not even that, but I think that having a meal after the liturgy is not only a very traditional thing, because really if you study the origin of the liturgy, when the apostles talk about the love feast was in conjunction with the celebration of the Eucharist, and that was a meal that followed the liturgy. But the fellowship that you have in that context makes a big difference, and people constantly over the years have commented to me what a family feel our parish has, and that makes people want to belong, because as was mentioned earlier, people feel very isolated in our culture, and so they don't feel like they're connected to anybody. But if they have a church where people care about them and they feel like they're a part of a bigger family, it makes a really huge difference. And then the other thing I would say, I have an article on how to build a parish. Starting a mission and building a parish is the title of the article, so you can read in more detail some of the things I'm talking about. But from the church growth literature that I studied when I was a Protestant, a lot of it is just pure garbage. It's, give people what they want, and that's not the Orthodox approach. We're never going to do a marketing survey to decide what kinds of services that we're going to do. But one of the practical things I did learn from reading this material was they talked about some just at least American sociological realities, and they pointed out that you have three things in a parish that will limit your growth. You have the worship space, obviously, you have the fellowship space, and you have the parking. And so if you have a huge church, but your fellowship space will accommodate about 30 people, and your parking lot will accommodate, about 30 people, you're never going to fill that big church because you don't have the room for it. And not everybody's going to stay for the meal after the liturgy, so the worship space doesn't necessarily need to be quite as big as the worship space, but it ought to be pretty close. And so if you keep those kinds of things in mind, and another very important thing that, as the dean of my part of the diocese, I often have reasons to look at people's parish websites, and I'm amazed that so many parishes don't understand the basic purpose of a parish website still. The basic purpose of a parish website is to say, here we are, here's where our services are, and here's how to get here. There's other things you can do, and I think it's good to have lots of bells and whistles on a website that will attract people to come to the website for other reasons. But if somebody's looking for an Orthodox parish in your area, they're going to just go to Google and say Orthodox parish in such and such place. And they're going to look that up. But if they go to your website and you haven't updated your parish calendar since 2020, they're going to figure, well, this parish is probably not even still open. And if they go to your parish and the website's in another language, you're communicating to the average American that this parish is not for you. So these are things that you want to keep in mind, and the very first page should say, here's where we're at, here's where our services are, here's our schedule so that you can find out more about our services. And if you do those things and you let people know that you're there, and there are things you can do to let people know that you're there. Like one thing we did, we have not every parish is going to have this, but we have an icon collector in our parish. So we did about 4 icon exhibits over the course of about 4 years. That brought a lot of people into the parish that would not otherwise have come. Now, if you don't have an icon collector, what you could do is maybe just pool your parish and find out who's got nice icons. They don't even have to be hand-painted. And just have somebody who can give a talk on what icons are and what they mean. And you probably could still get a lot of people who would come to that. So think about ways to bring people in the door. Make sure that people can find you. Make sure you have a sign that lets people know that you're there. One other thing that our parish has always done is our sign says St. Jonah Orthodox Church. It doesn't say St. Jonah Russian Orthodox Church. Not that we're trying to hide our connection with the Russian church abroad. But I know that if I was not Orthodox and I drove past a sign that said Russian Orthodox, I would probably be thinking, well, I'm not a Russian, so that's not my church. So you want your sign to convey that you are welcoming people, and your website should do the same. Brother Gabriel?
Hello, it's good to be here with you today. I'm Father Gabriel Weller from Holy Myrrh Bearers Orthodox Christian Church. And we got a blessing to add the word Christian to the name of our church. We're in the tip of the Bible Belt, which I heard someone talk about earlier. And people from the Bible Belt's families are well grounded in some kind of faith tradition. Maybe their families have been there for hundreds of years, helped build the church or whatever. And so for us to state the word Christian was important to us in our setting, because I'll go into town and somebody will say, "Are you Christian?" And I say, "Yeah." The first Christian church, but we can get into those topics if I have the time. But that was important to us. And so we started with, as a mission from our mother church, which is All Saints of North America in Middlebrook. And we started with 10 to 12 folks. And the Mennonite church in Harrisonburg was welcoming to let us use one of their Sunday school properties. And we had a Friday night Vesper service and Saturday morning liturgy, and then we took it down so they could have their Sunday school in there. And after about a year, we found a commercial property that we're able to use, and we were in there for 10 years. So then after 10 years, we were able to purchase a piece of land and then start the process of building. And glory to God, we've been in our new church for 2.5 years. We got a temporary occupancy permit at that time and continue to work on it today. We're working on trying to get our consecration done, which is scheduled for Memorial Day in 26, God willing. And it's been a blessing. It's been a blessing to be Orthodox in the South. Yeah. So who am I? Yeah, I'm a Virginia native. Generations, generations, and generations. They came over here across the pond from Germany on both sides of my family, so Orthodoxy has not been part of my family. I'm a convert, and some of my family still looks at me like I'm crazy. And in some respects, I am crazy, right? All right? I'm in love with the Lord. I try to serve Him, and so this is where I've been called to serve, and it's been a blessing. So we started to build a church, and Reader Daniel was involved in that, and we thank him for being part of our architectural part. And we had a lot of volunteers from the church that helped come out and put hands on. We did as much of it as we could ourselves. It's hard to fund an enterprise like building a church. We have about 5,000 square foot total. It's ours is not really shaped normally like an Orthodox church, but you'd never know it. We're shaped like a crucifix. When you come in the door, we have a traps on the right. We have education wing, traps on the left, education wing on the right. And then straight ahead is the nave. And that will really take you into the Orthodox church. You really feel like you're there. and the belly of the ship. So it's been a blessing to have that and to put the cupolas on top, like my brother spoke about. And we ended up on a busy road, which I think is 4,500 cars a day, which is busy for us because we have crowds across the road. So yeah, we count cars as 4,500. And to the cupola says, this is what we are. And like my brother said, we didn't say Russian, we said Orthodox. And we're 93% converts, glory to God. So we're working on becoming more Orthodox as we continue on. Anything else you want to add, or questions? Or
Well, one thing I think I forgot to mention, maybe I'm repeating myself, but I learned the hard way that it's important if you want to start a parish to be committed to sticking with it, because you're going to have a lot of disappointment on the front end of it, particularly if you're doing services in your house. There were many occasions when it would wind up just being me and my family, and you could easily ask yourself, why am I bothering with this? And we could have given up, but we wouldn't have gotten to where we're at if we had done that. And I think the key thing is if you're in an area that's got a reasonable sized population and there's not something inherent in your congregation or in your parish that's going to prevent you from being able to make a go of it, you can be successful. You just have to be willing to put up with the fact that it's not going to all happen at one time, because picking a parish is important to people, and a lot of people, they're going to want to make sure if they're going to start investing their time and their money and their emotions into a parish, that it's going to be there. And so some people, they're going to have to see it for a while before they're going to start saying, well, maybe I could go to that parish. So I think that's really the key, is being committed to it and being willing to stick to it. And also, I know a lot of parishes will start with just doing Vespers or maybe just doing the liturgy. We always did a vigil. Now, my wife and I knew how to do a vigil, and I know not everybody would be able to pull that off right off the bat. But there were times when we did a vigil where I was chanting it by myself when we were in the storefronts once we got out of my house, because nobody came. But I just did it, and now we have very full vigils, and that's how you get there. If one of the logics, it's kind of counterintuitive, but it really isn't, and that's that if you only do Vespers, if people are driving an hour to get to your church, and Vespers is 30 minutes, 45 minutes, a lot of them are going to figure, well, I'm not going to drive an hour for a 45-minute service. I'll just go to the liturgy. Whereas a vigil is going to be more like 2 hours and 15 minutes to 2.5 hours, maybe longer on some feasts. And so if people have to drive an hour, if it's a longer service, they're actually more likely to drive that hour than they will be if it's a shorter service. So I think doing a full liturgical cycle as much as you're able to do is something that I would encourage you to try to do. And then you don't have the problem of trying to get people used to doing vigil after they've been doing Vespers for a long time. But I mean, obviously mileage will vary, and I've counseled people who weren't able to do vigil because they just didn't know the services that well to start with Vespers. So it might be a good idea as a stepping stone under some circumstances. Do we have any questions? Okay.
This is on.
Thank you. You mentioned, Father, that your parish is 93% converts, and I'm wondering, what are the practical considerations, or how do you, in that environment, keep things orthodox, prevent things from going off the rails?
as best as you can. Because everybody's coming from a different faith tradition or no faith tradition. And so I try not to set a mold. I try to be somewhat flexible with what they need. But at the same time, too, having some kind of a set service that they become part of. Father John Modus of blessed memory used to say that we marinate in the service. And so the more they attend, the more Orthodox they become.
Fathers, what would you say to maybe a church that wanted to do an abbreviated vigil? just to try to get into the flow. Is that like sacrilege, or how does that work?
Well, most parishes do some kind of an abbreviated vigil, even mine. When I was a newer convert, I was trying to do everything to the hilt, and Father John Townsend's parish does it to the hilt, and it works for them, but I think in most cases it's probably not a good idea to try to do that. I mean, for example, the abbreviating of the first Kathisma at Vespers to Blessed is the Man, the way that it's normally sung, those are the kinds of services that St. John of Shanghai would have experienced growing up. And it just dawned on me one day, I was reading Father Seraphim Slobodskoy's Law of God, and he was describing the vigil, but he was describing a standard, somewhat abbreviated vigil, the way it's done on a parish level. And it just dawned on me, well, you know, if saints like St. John of Shanghai grew up in parishes like this and became great saints, maybe it would be okay to do that. So I think it makes it a little bit more manageable. St. John has an article that's on orthodoxinfo.com on how to keep the Typicon, and basically he talks about standard abbreviations, but he also talks about things that he doesn't think you should abbreviate. So I think that probably provides pretty good guidance on how to go about it. Yeah.
Thank you, Fathers. Maybe to connect this to something a little more southern, hospitality, and specifically the hospitality of how you approach welcoming new visitors into the nave even. Do you like to have greeters say hello to everyone? Do you have specific assigned chores? How do you approach that, and what has worked?
In our parish, we have a lady by the name of Rosa, who's a Honduran Jew, and she is the sweetest lady in the world, and she makes sure she keeps an eye out for everybody who comes in the door, makes them feel at home, make sure they stay for the meal afterwards. And she's got tons of godchildren as a result of that. But having somebody who's going to do that, and the thing is, she's not always able to be there. I mean, her health is not always great. So I've literally got up and made announcements saying, you know, Rosa's not going to be here for the next couple of weeks, so I need some people to step up and do what Rosa does. So encouraging people to try to be like that, because it is true that if somebody comes into your church for the first time and nobody talks to them, and then they walk out of your church and still no one's talked to them, the chances are really good they're never going to come back, and they're going to feel like, well, that's a cold parish. Even if they'd stayed for the meal afterwards, maybe they would have had a different impression, but they weren't made to feel comfortable on the front end, so they never got to that point. So I think it is very important. And another thing that we do is we have visitor sheets that we have people fill out so that we can put them on our email list and make contact with them after the fact. So these are kind of practical things I think are very important.
We somewhat have a team of people, and I don't even have to navigate with it. It just takes off, and people are very friendly, and they reach out. So, yeah.
Okay, back here with another question.
This is actually a comment, Father, to your point about removing the Russian from the name of your church. This is just a true story to maybe inform some. But our church is Antiochian, and our priest ended up dropping the Antiochian from the name simply because a local pastor asked him what we had against the Ochians. That's a true story, but it shows what our culture is like.
Well, the Antiochians have one big advantage, because you see missionary Baptist churches that are Antiochian missionary Baptist church, so people don't know that Antiochian refers to an ethnic group.
I like to also tell people that I'm from up south, not down south. Down is warm and fuzzy, but I'm from up south. So I'm over the Blue Ridge Mountains in the valley, okay, but the south is closer to heaven. So I'm from up south.
What about funding? Where do you get your money? Tithing? What do you charge for things? Candles, prospera, lunch, things like that?
Well, Russians have been conditioned to nickel and dime people and talk about dues, and we don't do that. We never talk about dues. We just encourage people to tithe, and we don't even put a price on candles. We just have a donation box and let people put in what they want to, and I think we probably wind up with more money that way than we would if we put a dollar amount on it. And same thing with the prospera. We don't tell people to put an amount in there, but we do have a little box that people can put it in there. So I think encouraging tithing is the best way to do it, and particularly if you have a lot of people who are converting from Protestantism. A lot of them are used to tithing, and so you might as well, not dissuade them from doing something that's a perfectly orthodox thing to do. I mean, St. Vladimir has built a church that's called the Church of the Tithes. So tithing is not an unorthodox concept, contrary to what some people will tell you. And one of the problems with nickel and diming people and dues is that if you say the dues are $100 a month, there's a lot of people that will say, okay, here's $100 a month. But if you say tithe, maybe they're not going to tithe. But if you say, well, look, if you can't tithe, start with 1% and work from there, you're going to wind up with more money in most cases than you will if you say, here's the set dues, because the dues are usually going to be set on the low end of the spectrum because you don't want to exclude people who couldn't afford to pay what a rich person could pay. But you're going to have some rich people that are going to say, well, here's your $100 that you asked for. But if you say tithe, then it winds up being fair.
Our first fundraiser was, how do you eat an elephant?
One bite at a time.
Yeah. And so I had the kids draw an outline of an elephant on a big poster board, and we had a goal. And we just kept collaring it in as people gave donations. We had yard sales. I think we sold lemonade. I'm not sure what all we did. We did everything we could to raise money and to grow the church. And when we had about 35 to 40 members, we were at the point where we were going to build a church. And I had relationships with the bank because I was a businessman as well as a priest at the time. And so I leveraged my bankers to help us fund the church, and off we went. So everybody has a little different story how they come into operation, but that's our story.
Last question. Last question back here.
Hello. When you're working with Southerners of Protestant backgrounds, what are some of the main barriers that you tend to encounter that keep them out of the church? What are some evangelism techniques and pastoral techniques that you've used to get around those barriers?
Well, because I was one of them at one time, I have an easy time with this one, because usually Protestants object to things like venerating icons, venerating the saints, the Mother of God. So I already know how to answer the questions, but I'll just let them ask the questions and start answering them. But when a Protestant starts to discover that there are good answers to these things, and even when you, like, I'll argue iconography from the Bible. I know that they're not going to care about, the Seventh Ecumenical Council so much as they will the Bible, but you can show from the Bible that, God commanded that icons be made in the Old Testament tabernacle and temple, and that basically they were everywhere you looked. So why was that? If we're supposed to have 4 white walls and a bench to sit on, that doesn't make sense. So I think that if you're a convert priest, you have an easy time. Now, if you didn't grow up as a Protestant, you probably need to educate yourself a bit so that you'll be able to answer those kinds of questions.
Okay, thank you, Father Gabriel. Thank you, Father Gabriel, Father John. There's no break now. We're actually ahead of schedule. Father Paul Siewers, if you come forward, please. We're actually ahead of schedule. We'll try to keep that on that track so we can maximize time for Q&A on the last panel. Father Paul.
Hello, esteemed fathers, brothers, and sisters. I've been asked in discussions with Russian Orthodox Christians how an American like myself ended up becoming a clergyman in the Russian Orthodox Church abroad. The better question remains how I, such a sinner, did by God's grace. But as to why an American found a calling in the Orthodox Church, this seems complicated in my case. I am in a melded Russian-American family, but that happened after I became Orthodox. My surname is associated with Estonia, in which Russian Orthodoxy is a predominant faith, yet I am significantly Celtic and Scandinavian in ancestry. One part of my background includes Puritans and an ancestor militiaman who grabbed a musket to fight at the Battle of Lexington. My path to Orthodox Christianity actually lay through study of early Irish literature and culture, early Welsh, Norse sagas, and Viking history. How in all that was I led to Russian Orthodoxy as a spiritual tradition, recognizing that I was not in one sense any more Russian than many Roman Catholics are Roman. I told them that I found surprising overlaps between aspects of American and Russian cultural models, along with the obvious differences. I referred to aspects of American cultural views that are not only hyper self-assertive, the kind of Western rational egoism that Dostoevsky criticized in his novels, but that also contrariwise can evoke a Jacobite imaginative community, awaiting the return of the king, yearning for a hidden lost faith and country. This echoes through American life from a strange meld of Anglo, Irish, Scottish, Appalachian culture, out of sync with mainstream Enlightenment-based norms. In literary terms, it could be considered typified by James Macpherson's Lays of Ossian and the writings of the Anglo-Irish Edmund Burke, with hidden loyalties to a secret king and a lost faith, best realized in rediscovery of the Orthodox Church by the West today. I think that cultural orientation overlaps partly with the monarchist exile history of the Russian Orthodox Church abroad. Therein lies an element of what J.R.R. Tolkien called the long defeat of the elves, perhaps paralleling why some modern men dress up in kilts for Robbie Burns's dinners, featuring haggis in the face of cultural disaster in the West. This may be a weird theory of mine, but I will try to describe it here further nonetheless. First, I would say that my study of early Irish literature included a focus on saints' lives, especially on St. Columba and traditions of his monastic community of Iona. St. Columba, who lived around the year 600, is not only one of the most prominent and influential holy men of the early Celtic or Irish Sea world, he is also relevant to this talk, the patron saint of the Scots-Irish, having bridged both island realms, indeed having played a role in establishing what became Scotland. I learned how the early monasticism of the Columban monasteries and many other saints and communities of early Ireland and Wales reflected the influence of the desert monasticism of the Byzantine world in the East. Indeed, the Irish Sea was said in many ways to have the most continuity from early Christian culture in the West of any other region in Western Europe. From that Irish Sea world came much Christian influence on what became Scotland, England, and also the Vikings, who themselves participated in the founding of what became Russia. This was also in modern times, of course, the home zone of the Scots-Irish. To return to that more recent history, I mentioned my thesis that American culture has shown forth a type of imaginative Jacobitism, perhaps especially influential in Appalachia, which bridges the South and the North heartland of America's core east of the Mississippi. In a minute, I'll return to that term, Jacobitism, as a shorthand label for what I'm trying to describe. But the controversial Russian philosopher and polemicist, Alexander Dugin, has argued that certain civilizations are thalassocratic or sea-based, such as the British Empire and the transatlantic culture of the global West. However, some cultures are more what he calls land-based or homeland-based. He has argued, interestingly, that America is a culture that has tendencies in both directions. It is part of the transatlantic culture of globalization, but also has roots in a land-based homeland culture, which again I would identify foundationally with Appalachia. Likewise, J.R.R. Tolkien wrote of his love for Little England and not the British Empire of Great Britain. It is in the localized culture of a homeland sense of America, rather than the secular technological modernity of globalization, that I think Orthodox Christian evangelism has its greatest hope of taking root in North America today. Our mission in central Pennsylvania, a part of northern Appalachia, sometimes known as Pennsyltucky, just opened a modest country church, and already we have several catechumens, glory to God, a large number for our little community, in an area where Orthodoxy is pretty much brand new. Our area is rooted in local cultural networks that include family connections to the south, but also affinities ranging from Holy Trinity Monastery in Jordanville in the north, all the way to Holy Cross Monastery in West Virginia in the south, both in the Appalachian region. To get back to Jacobitism, the term links the biblical style of the name of King James of Scotland and England, enduring in the translation of the Bible that bears his name, through his grandson, the deposed King James II, to the younger James's grandson, Charles Edward Stuart, better known as Bonnie Prince Charlie. Legends of the latter's exile with the loss of old-style kingship and ancient faith and hopes for their return shaped Christian monarchist undertones in an American Jacobitism of the imagination. The latter arguably lingers in local cultural resistance to technocracy and to Gnostic virtual realities, preserving hopes for a hidden traditional Christian order to be renewed. Tolkien's fantasy mythology, influenced by Celtic traditions, offers a reminder of the continuing power of the idea of the return of a lost king and lost faith, evoked in the title The Return of the King. Tolkien, according to Kentucky essayist Guy Davenport, drew on Appalachian American culture for his Shire of Hobbits, drawing on extensive correspondence with a former student living in Kentucky. The epidemic of loneliness and meaninglessness felt among people in the West today, evidenced in continued popularity of Tolkien's fantasy as a kind of antidote, includes a yearning for hidden and lost meanings that the Orthodox Church fills. Perhaps the anthem for Jacobitism is the Sky Boat Song about the disappearance of Bonnie Prince Charlie and hopes for his return. Jacobitism, strictly speaking, involved Scottish, Irish, and English sympathies for restoration of the House of Stuart, which was vanquished in the Glorious Revolution of 1688, in which James II of England, Prince Charlie's grandfather, was deposed. The Glorious Revolution set the basis for England's modern parliamentary government. That involved the Whiggish embrace of secular progress that Dostoevsky criticized in his depictions of London's Crystal Palace in the Victorian age, alongside accelerated secularization of English religious culture. The result can be seen today in Britain's current post-Christian state with its weak Anglicanism and Toryism. But Jacobitism remained an ongoing tendency toward resistance against modernity, reflected in the literary works of Sir Walter Scott, in the views of some British romantics, such as Samuel Taylor Coleridge, and in the arts and crafts movement, and efforts to revive folk arts and high church Protestant and Catholic movements. In America, echoes of this were represented in ongoing and renewed attachment to the King James Bible, even among Scots Irish believers in America, often not high church or liturgical Protestants, but populist in orientation. It seems strange that the seal of the Stuart monarch authorizing the translation, together with its old school beauty of language, helped shape a certain aura of Christian kingship around the Bible itself. But it fit paradoxically the restive rebelliousness, a devotion to the last Stuarts, and the ultimate outlaw, King Jesus, of this Jacobite imagination. The idea of the monarch having an affinity for the common people, as opposed to grandees oppressing them, helped inform the movement towards the American Revolution, including aspects of both Federalist thinking and paradoxically Jacksonian democracy. So a leading American mythmaker, James Fenimore Cooper, flipped effortlessly from a Federalist background to being a Jacksonian Democrat. The center of Cooper's mythmaking, Cooperstown, New York, lies coincidentally near Jordanville, a Russian Orthodox American center today. Cooper's novel, The Pioneers, includes a sympathetic depiction of an underground Tory history of his fictional landscape in upstate New York. Such American tendencies show surprisingly weird parallels to the slogan, Orthodoxy, Autocracy, and Nationality, under Tsar Nicholas I in Russia. In America, they mingle with the declaration of a nation under God, as in the Gettysburg Address. That phrase, nation under God, gained popularity over time and was put into the Pledge of Allegiance, not so much because of any in-depth analysis in political science, but because of resistance to exclusively Enlightenment neo-paganism, which would seek to disestablish and erase older Christian faith in America over time. Like flying the Gadsden or Liberty Tree flags, In God We Trust ended up on our currency in Jacobite fashion. More U.S. presidents were of Scots-Irish background than any other, mixed with Anglo backgrounds. That meld of folk cultures was a significant influence in Appalachia as it crosses southern and middle and northern states, including where I live in central Pennsylvania. Those of Ulster background did not necessarily become American Jacobites, but Protestant Scots-Irish culture lingering in Northern Ireland today remains arguably both more religious and more supportive of monarchy than any other constituency in the fragmenting United Kingdom. Imaginative American Jacobitism, the yearning for a lost king of an old community faith at odds with modern norms, linking populism to absent monarchism in a framework of frontier Christian faith, found broad cultural resonance with those of English, Irish, and other backgrounds. The Stuarts were Catholics, but Scottish Episcopalians in Aberdeenshire, Covenanters in the southwest of Scotland, near where you cross to Ulster, as well as High Church English and Anglo-Irish folks, also shared Jacobite tendencies with Highlander Catholics. Scottish Catholics in North Carolina and Scots Covenanters in the South brought their distinct and paradoxically Jacobite, not Jacobin, revolutionary tendencies with them to America, for example. Northern Appalachia can seem a region apart, but remains connected to some of these trends, as apart from coastal elites. Locally focused, often oriented toward agrarian communities or old coal and steel neighborhoods. As mentioned, set in northern Appalachia, Cooper's Leatherstocking Tales, a foundational literary myth for America, illustrates Jacobite emphases in a Tory subplot to its key volume, The Pioneers. Cooper's The American Democrat and other writings illustrated his unhappiness with Whiggish business plutocracy in his day and what he saw as ensuing moral corruption of America. Jacobitism of the imagination in American culture went beyond the institutionalized coastal Anglo-Saxon or WASP establishment culture, which remains an object of both nostalgia and opprobrium, and often subverted WASP elitism in America. Arguably, Jacobite-style themes also played a role in literary themes of what the Southern Catholic writer Flannery O'Connor famously called, as we've heard many times today, the Christ-haunted South. These include Southern Gothic writings like hers and what has been called implied nobility in the tone of Shelby Foote's epic history of the Civil War, backgrounded by critiques of technocracy and Depression-era Southern agrarianist writings and their modernist malcontents like the work of Walker Percy, with all their virtues and vices, as well as Southern black spirituals and spirituality that emerged from slavery, and American gospel, folk, and hillbilly music. It echoes on in pop culture and diverse roots of American country music in English, Irish, Scottish, African folk music traditions. Chris Christopherson, after a night out in Nashville, stumbled unbelieving into a Sunday morning Protestant worship service. He came out after answering the altar call, weeping to his surprise, and wrote, "Why Me, Lord?" It became his top-selling single and signature finale. The King is no more, but the Lord is the King who will return, Jesus Christ. Eric Nelson of Harvard argues that a neo-Stuart view of royalist privilege informed the U.S. Constitution and the shaping of the presidency, in his book, The Royalist Revolution, Monarchy and the American Founding. Royalist patriots, he argues, tried to get George III to revive monarchical powers in the spirit of 75 in defense of the people against what were seen as moneyed English interests, and carried these views to the Philadelphia Convention in 1787, where the Constitution was drawn up. Even recent voting patterns in Appalachia from the South up through Pennsylvania still show in support for President Trump, love him or hate him, as a kind of mythic figure whose re-election legendarily was stolen and would return. For good or bad, these tendencies thumbing a nose at coastal elites in favor of an unlikely surrogate king figure seen as heroically surviving assassination. Beyond politics and more deeply, as historian Nelson has noted, the U.S. Constitution, as it emerged from the Declaration of Independence and was extended by the Bill of Rights and the memory of the under God phrase of the Gettysburg Address, came to involve a remarkably monarchical sense of the central executive, unique among developed constitutional democracies, yet also linked to mysterious layers of federalism and checks and balances, including the filibuster, Supreme Court, composition of the Senate, First and Second Amendments, and ideas of a civil religion originally based in Christian culture. All these together approximate weirdly aspects of Orthodox Christian culture of conciliarity, Sobornost, Symphonia, and pre-revolutionary Russian and Byzantine ideas of monarchy, with a commonality of old Christian culture at the base from the Reformation era, however different in form. Reminiscent of University of Chicago historian Anthony Caldelis's argument for recognizing the Christian Roman Empire known as Byzantium as a republic. Think of Tolkien's own admission that he was an unconstitutional monarchist and an anarchist at the same time. This could be a description of a Jacobite, Old English Catholic that he was, as well as of an adherent of Sobornost and Russian Tsarism. Sobornost involved a mystical spiritual unity. The term originated as a gloss on the Greek Catholicos, adopted into Latin in the Nicene Creed. But while in the West, Catholic took on the meaning of spatially universal, as in papism and globalization, in Slavonic, Sobornost had the deeper meaning of solidarity, energized by God's uncreated grace. The Orthodox preservation of the true sense of the uncreated energies encourage this. Orthodoxy properly distinguishes in doctrine and practice between essence and energy, while recognizing their unity as well. Jacobitism offers a typology of this in the sense of a spiritual unity of community based in traditional Christian faith, even if heterodox, but awaiting the coming of the American Orthodox mission in whose era we now stand. Speaking of Sobornost and Jacobitism, consider the Russian Orthodox Christian writer Alexander Solzhenitsyn. His writing also set me up for my Orthodox conversion. I was in high school when his Gulag Archipelago came out in English and gobbled it up. I especially was entranced by accounts of faith amid the prison camps of communism. Solzhenitsyn and family in exile lived in a small township in northern Appalachia, Cavendish, Vermont. There he was said especially to admire the old New England town meeting system that still functioned as local governance there, in which community members voted on all measures of governance. This perhaps typified Tolkien's idea of a kind of localism bordering on anarchism, which he nonetheless felt should be mingled with unconstitutional monarchy, a combination that could also be summed up again as both Jacobite and Sobornost in spirit. For Solzhenitsyn, who loved a similar system of local government in rural Switzerland, which had served as a way station in his exile too, this exemplified the type of governance he felt traditionally best for Russia, local communes combined with Tsarism, so to speak, township zemsky sobors. Thomas Jefferson, a Southern writer, unfortunately tended toward Unitarian deism religiously, but imbibing of a similar spirit inspired the Anti-Federalists in advocating for New England town meetings as a model of local governance from the roots up, while referencing God's monarchical rule as an ultimate measure of human rulers in the Declaration of Independence. Even controversial Scots-Irish firebrand John Calhoun's idea of concurrent majorities or social compact resonates with the Jacobite spirit, despite Calhoun's Unitarian tendencies and other problem views, most notably his pro-slavery racialism. Today, the term Jacobitism is easily confused with its near homophonic Jacobinism and obscured by it. Jacobinism means radical revolutionary tendencies, originally as named from the French Revolution. Jacobinism in Russia, in the form of Leninist Bolshevism, killed the king and sought to kill the church. In America, 21st century Jacobinists seek to kill our surrogate working monarchy, the old Constitution, while also looking to erase traditional Christian faith, primarily by making it invisible in the schooling, cyberspace, and careers where many young people today grow up. The revolution will be televised because it is in line with the technocracy we've got. But still, imaginative Jacobite yearning for lost faith and king finds resonance in a country with deep religious roots amid rising domination of educational, media, governmental, and corporate realms by Jacobinism, increasingly intolerant of imaginative cultural community and of so-called Appalachian deplorables and traditional Christianity. One poll shows that 43% of millennial Americans don't know or care about or believe in God, a percentage undoubtedly higher for up-and-coming Generation Z. Russia today, unbelievably for Americans with Cold War memories, is arguably a preeminently major Christian culture, at least in its public culture in the world. Yet even so, Christ-haunted America lingers, awaiting a stronger faith than Protestantism or Catholicism can provide. During the 20th century and beyond, the Russian church in exile kept in its culture a spirit of monarchism, anti-Jacobinism, and what the exile Russian Orthodox philosopher S.L. Frank called strange love for a homeland that no longer exists. That is acutely the condition of modern human beings, but chronically of human nature since the fall. Hence the continued relevance of this tradition, not in terms of politics, but the cultural context in which many Americans convert to Russian Orthodoxy today, and other forms of Orthodoxy as well, amid efforts to missionize America to an Orthodox Christian country over time. Those within the Orthodox Church find fulfillment and desire for the return of the Emperor of Emperors, our Lord and God and Savior Jesus Christ. This fully apostolic Christian faith is not lost if somewhat hidden to worldly thought at large in places as humble as our small mission in northern Appalachia, because it is in the heart. I fell into Russian Orthodoxy as a literary graduate student because of my Celtic studies, my reading of Dostoevsky's The Brothers Karamazov, and my encounter with the Orthodox monasticism of one of the communities founded in America by Elder Ephraim. My Celtic and Baltic ancestral connections seem to respond to the call of Orthodoxy, which thankfully swept away my earlier religious backgrounds in Yankee Unitarian Universalism and Christian Science. The typology of old Anglo-Scottish Irish Jacobitism of the imagination in America, Tolkien's Kingship, points to the true faith in contradistinction to modern Jacobinism that would erase it. That is true so long as Jacobitism can be realized as not an endpoint, but typology. Recognizing this may help with Orthodox evangelism in Appalachian and heartland America, reaching those with such native human longings for God in their hearts of whatever culture or age in our era of digital wasteland. But that fulfillment remains in the heart, or more properly in the nous, or eye of the soul, coming into the heart through God's grace in the Orthodox Church returning to the West after an exile of centuries that was never complete. This is the real return of the King. Once with students, I visited the Tadadaho, or spiritual leader of the Iroquois Confederacy, at their longhouse in upstate New York, not far from Jordanville. The conversation focused on nature. Asked what the greatest environmental problem facing America was, he answered, the separation of church and state in the United States, which was surprising to everybody. He said that America had adopted, according to Iroquois historical lore, the mechanics of federal government and checks and balances in the Constitution from the Iroquois Confederacy, but not the spiritual solidarity needed for it to work. In Orthodox terms, that missing element is subornost, typed by what can be called this Jacobitism of the imagination. In our little Appalachian missions altar stands a 7-branched candlestick from Russia. It reminds us of the old temple menorah, which symbolized the glory of God in the temple that departed at the time of the Babylonian exile, yet was figured as returning at the fulfillment of the temple in the incarnation of Jesus Christ. The candelabra figures in the account of the Maccabees. It was taken by the Romans during the destruction of Jerusalem and the Second Temple in AD 70, memorialized on the Arch of Titus in Rome, and then rescued by the Saint Emperor Justinian from the Vandals, who had looted it to safeguard, and Justinian wished to safeguard it reverently at Constantinople, which of course eventually fell itself. This candelabra graces the altar tables of Orthodox churches worldwide, showing the fulfillment of Old Testament Israel in the Orthodox Church, even in small missions in Appalachia. For our mission of Russian exile, it also points to historical and cultural associations of the tradition of Russian Orthodoxy, keeping alive Eastern Orthodoxy during various periods of history. But it is the symbolized illumination of the 7 gifts of the Holy Spirit in unity, subornost, that makes the lampstand known, also from the book of Revelation, significant more than any historical and merely cultural meanings. So it is with Jacobitism. It points to subornost and the deep mystical community of the church as the body of Christ in Appalachia as a deeply rooted local fractal of the one holy Catholic Apostolic Church for all peoples and nations. Thank you.
Okay, there will be no break now. We'll go right to the last panel with, last and possibly least, with Richard Hines and some other, oh, that's me, with Richard Hines and me, and after we're finished with the two of us, we'll have a short break, and then we'll have a question and answer session with all of the speakers. Richard, you want to come forward, please? Do you prefer to stand or sit?
Well, stand.
Stand, okay. Can you turn this one on, Jada? Okay, that's good. Okay. Okay. I'd like to start with a brief observation and a question for the participants, and then a question for you. I'm sure many of you have noticed there has been a whole raft of videos online recently warning people away from Orthodoxy. Most of them are coming from conservative Protestants of various sorts, evangelicals, or like very cranky Calvinists, things of that sort, and a few from Roman Catholics. But there seems to be a growing air of desperation about these videos. You know, don't do that. Don't look at that man behind the curtain. That thing is not for you. And one of the interesting things that ties all of these together is this kind of thing that says essentially, well, even if you're dissatisfied with this or that tradition you grow up in, that can't be the right one because that's not American. That's not Western. You're a Western person. So even if you're unhappy with being Roman Catholic or Lutheran or whatever you might be, you can consider other options, but don't consider that one because that's an Eastern thing. That's alien. That's not you. And what's interesting about these videos is you look at the comments on them. I say, hey, great, keep them coming, because the comments are all saying, hey, I got to check this thing out. So this seems to be something of a trend. I don't know where it's going. I've noticed too, and maybe some people have noticed this in your parishes, that whereas most of the inquirers we tend to get over the years are maybe from a Protestant background, we seem to be getting more Roman Catholics these days. I don't know what that means. Who knows what goes on in the rest of the world, but they're continuing to come. And I'm just sort of wondering about how this all works, just in terms of a survey here. How many of you, I'm not asking about cradles versus converts, how many of you come from what we call the traditional Orthodox ethnic groups like Greeks, Serbs, Russians, Georgians, Romanians, whatever? How many of you are ethnics? Peter, you can raise your hand too. Okay. All right. So look, I mean, how many is that? That's fewer than 10 people in here, for goodness sake. So that means all the rest of you are people who have somehow, the ones of you who are Orthodox, which I think is most of you, the rest of you have stumbled into this really alien, odd thing that is not supposed to be for you, because it's some strange thing. And I'd like to explore that a little bit talking to Richard, because, okay, here I am. I'm just a simple barefoot Greek boy. I've been here for 100 years, if you count my 4 grandparents from Sparta who came to America at the beginning of the 20th century. My parents were born here in a very, very assimilated American house, even though all of their parents were Greek. My father didn't even speak Greek at home because his parents had the attitude that we're an American now, we speak English here. So he didn't speak Greek well at all, though he could understand it. My parents never spoke Greek at home, except when they didn't want me and my brother to understand what they were talking about. And so over 100 years or so, I've assimilated to what is essentially, for my ancestors, a kind of a foreign identity. I go to Serbia, places like that. They say, oh, Jim, a Greek friend from America. I said, no, I'm your American friend of Greek origin, of Greek ancestry, but I've been assimilated. I don't speak Greek. I understand a little bit. I speak more Spanish than I speak Greek. And so I'm not really an ethnic in that sort anymore, except my name indicates that, and obviously I'm still Orthodox. So there's that sort of little bit of alien origin that still adheres to me. But see, the flip side of that is somebody like Richard, and that's the question I want to ask Richard. You can't get more American, more Southern than Richard. Yet here he is, and here a lot of you are, in this very odd place to be spiritually, historically, culturally, which is an Orthodoxy. So I'd like to ask you not only how you came to it, but how you reconcile it with your American and Southern origins.
Jim, let me begin by saying, let's stop apologizing for being Russian Orthodox. I didn't join the church in this country. I joined the church at Optima Pustin Monastery that's featured in the Brothers Karamazov. As a matter of fact, when the Soviet Union fell apart, they reconstructed the monastery based on the description of the monastery in the Brothers Karamazov. So let's stop apologizing, and I'm not apologizing for being Southern. I don't get my history from Wikipedia. Let's cut down the screen time and read books. And if you can't, I would recommend, particularly anybody under 30 here, and there are quite a few of you, take an hour a day, early, 5 o'clock in the morning, 10 p.m. at night. Read for an hour. Read something you don't have to read. And if you can't do it for an hour, do it for 30 minutes. Get off the computer. With regard to videos, I think we're just bowing too much to the bitch goddesses of pop culture and pop history.
You're on a roll. Continue.
Oh. Well, I guess I was at a place I won't mention, probably in 2016 in the Middle East, because somebody would probably take an interest in it, and I was with a group of right parliamentarians, having been a parliamentarian, I guess, as a state legislator, and I met a lady from Russia and a Russian member of the Duma, And they casually said, well, if you're ever in Russia, why don't you come to the monastery at Optimopustan? And sure enough, I ended up there and went down there, and there was something about the spiritual power of the place. So if God smiles on you, and you're fortunate enough to have the means to ever make a pilgrimage to Optimopustan, you should do it. I mean, this was the center of Russian Orthodoxy throughout the 19th century, all the way to the Bolshevik Revolution. And in 1993, how many of you know this? There were 3 monks were martyred by a Satanist with a ritual dagger. And that was the wellspring of the renewal of Orthodoxy in Russia.
Can you say a few words again about how it relates to your, in other words, did you not feel, though, that going in this direction, whether you call it Russian Orthodoxy, just Orthodoxy, that moving in that direction somehow was an abandonment of your own origins?
Well, by the way, I gave out, these are 35 years old, and I was an editor all the way up through when I was in the Reagan administration. And I gave these out. We don't have one for everybody, but we're just going to put them on the tables. And you can take them.
I get that one, right?
Yeah, you do. And this is about the neglected Southern monarch, the Church of St. Photos in Florida, St. Augustine. And it's an interesting history. I won't get off on that. But the question is wrong. That's yours. The question of, isn't it somehow bad to be Russian if you're American? That's like saying, well, we don't want to read Greek philosophers. We want to read Ralph Waldo Emerson. Nonsense. Emerson's garbage compared to Aristotle.
You didn't answer my question.
No, I don't think we should.
He's a good
feel-
politician, isn't he? You don't answer. You say what you damn want to say. You don't answer the guy's question.
No, the question is, I mean, we are the personification. We are the personification of how Southern American culture is compatible with Russian Orthodoxy. We're it. It is compatible.
How? Explain that. Again, your origins are very, very different. You grew up as Anglican, Episcopalian, correct? No?
Didn't we all?
No, some of us didn't. I raised my hand.
I used to call it the church, and it was not always that way, but I used to call the Episcopal Church the church of what's happening now. You know, it develops the momentary man.
That was Flip Wilson. Remember that?
Well,
There you go.
maybe so.
There you go.
Maybe it did come from Flip Wilson. I don't know, after having denounced pop culture. But, yeah, I'm a recovering Episcopalian. And speaking of that, I did want to, when I was talking to the one English-speaking monk between in the forest in Optima, he was talking about Orthodoxy and the Optima elders, for which I took the name Ambrosi, one of the elders. And I was talking about T.S. Eliot. And I think there's a great deal of compatibility. And that's the only thing I actually wanted to read was an excerpt from Eliot's. Does anybody know what Little Gidding was? Anybody read it? All right, well, it was the return. By the way, this is Don Livingston. Dr. Don Livingston knows more about philosopher David Hume than Hume knew about himself, and he founded the Abbeville Institute. And I recommend all of you get online and go to the Abbeville Institute site. Don, thank you for doing. Thanks for getting me involved in the Ludwell Fellowship. Anyway, you know, Eliot left Missouri. I think he went to Harvard and became a monarchist and a high churchman in England. And things actually didn't evolve the way Eliot thought they would. But his fourth quartet, Little Gidding, was about, in the 17th century, a return to monasticism. It was a form of monasticism in Cambridgeshire. And in that sense, it's very similar to Optimopustan. It's very removed to this idea. Pustan, you know, means desert. You've got to be otherworldly. And so Little Gidding was. And I'm just going to give you one quote from Eliot's Little Gidding. With the drawing of this love and the voice of this calling, we shall not cease from exploration. And at the end of all our exploring, we'll arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. Through the unknown, unremembered gate, when the last of earth left to discover is that which was at the beginning. Quick now, here, now, always, a condition of complete simplicity, costing not less than everything. And all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well, when the tongues of flame are enfolded into the crown knot of fire, and the fire and the rose are one. I find that so compatible with Dostoevsky's feeling of the beauty of holiness. It's completely compatible.
Let me take issue with you on one point and then follow up with a question. Because you said we shouldn't be ashamed of being Russian Orthodox and presumably Greek or Serbian or whatever it might be. And I don't think it's something to be ashamed of, but I think the point that I think Father Gabriel made is that you see Russian Orthodox Church on a sign, that means, okay, that ain't for me. Greek Orthodox Church, I ain't a Greek, I'm not a Russian, I'm not a Serb. And if you say Orthodox Christian, that even clarifies it more for people who, think we may be something else despite the cross on the priest's chest. And I guess my question is this. I like aesthetically onion domes as much as the next guy does. But to me, sometimes when you see something that is so outstandingly foreign looking, it almost comes across like a Sikh temple or something like that. And it's something you say, look how exotic. Now, I can understand, too, that part of our appeal, let's take this back a few decades. If you go back to the 20s, 30s, 40s, even into the 60s in this country, when you had so many priests who were clean-shaven and wearing the minister suits and all that, because America wasn't quite as comfortable with other cultures, and especially immigrants, they wanted to fit in, they wanted to look respectable. And back then, Western clergymen were objects of respect, but not so much as they are today. So I can understand why they would want to look that way. But today, Americans want something that is different. In other words, since our, let's face it, our society is falling apart in many ways, people don't want same old, same old. They don't want to look at other traditions that may have been respectable in America a few decades ago but are not respectable now, so actually looking somewhat foreign or somewhat different is maybe in our interest, but I wonder where the limit to that is, where it just looks like almost like a museum piece transported out of the old country somewhere. I'm just sort of wondering where that line is. Give an example. Since after all, Orthodoxy came from the Greeks, when it went to these other countries like Serbia, Russia, Romania, it took on local roots, local cultural patterns. Even the tones of the music are very different from Greek tones. And we see some of this maybe on some levels in America today, like Father Deacon Patrick here at St. John's Cathedral. On Meat Fair Sunday, they used to serve blini, which makes no sense because you have that on Cheese Fair Sunday. Why would you have blini on Meat Fair Sunday? No, that's not the reason. What should you have if you're going to have something on Meat Fair Sunday in America? What? Chili. You have a chili cook-off. Now, that's Americanizing things a little bit, but that's a peripheral. Obviously, you're not doing things like, in terms of liturgics that are going to be Americanized. Where do we draw a balance between being different enough for people to say, this is worth checking out, and not being too different that it looks like just some sort of exoticism? And where do we bring in American and even specifically Southern culture into the life of our church in a way that still maintains its Orthodox integrity?
Jim, I'm old enough to have known your mother, of blessed memory, Stella. And you talk about an Orthodox Joan of Arc. She was it, and she would have been on my side on this one.
Well, I stand rebuked. My mom was take no prisoners, so it's I'm just a pale imitation. So okay, so where's the line though? How do we nativize Orthodoxy, but not lose what it's supposed to be?
Well, let's reject this bitch goddess of perfecting government in the state of Virginia. Yeah, I like the bitch goddess thing because it's out there, this idea of, you know, let me be blunt, if I haven't been blunt enough. We got a senator from my state named Lindsey Graham. And about 18 months ago, in a moment of weakness, I turned on CNN, and there was Lindsey with the president of Ukraine. And what did he say? He said, I tell you what, he said, you keep killing those Russians, and we'll keep sending you money. Well, I mean, that's heresy. That's not Christian. It has nothing to do with the preaching of St. Paul. It has to do with Karl Marx and maybe Abraham Lincoln, but not St. Paul.
All right. Well, look. Since you mentioned Linda Graham, let me raise another question, and that is, again, it relates to the foreignness of Orthodoxy in the perception of many people, and specifically this whole Russian thing. Some people are a little concerned about this in terms of what kind of scrutiny our church is going to be under. I mean, of course, you know, somebody asked me today, who's the Fed around here? I said, this is Northern Virginia. Everybody's a Fed up here, you know. It says you can't spot the glowy. They all glow, you know.
Rebecca Dillingham told me to take off my glasses because I look like a Fed.
Yeah, well, there you go. Wait a minute. How does glasses make you look like a Fed?
You know, they walk around with dark. I mean,
Yeah.
and half of them,
dark glasses. Yeah,
I
okay.
have been in charge
Yeah.
of federal law enforcement, a force of 12,000 officers at the General Services Administration, which is now part of Homeland Security. And most of them don't know what they're doing. And I do not think we should live in fear of these perceptions.
No, you don't live in fear of them, but you do have to be aware of them. And you're right, the dark glasses probably don't do it, but the wire in your ear will tend to do that. You know, it's like... But isn't there a legitimate concern? And we've seen this, like, for example, we saw under the Biden administration when conservative Roman Catholics were being under surveillance from the FBI. Do we have to worry, not worry, but at least be aware of the fact that, at least in some sectors, being not only conservative Christian, but being tied to a church perceived as foreign, and even worse, a Russian church, is something that could be a problem for people? I mean, like, I don't know how many people here since we're not pointing the camera out toward the participants, how many people might be concerned, okay, if I tell people I'm applying for a certain job, maybe one connected with the government, one connected with a security clearance, maybe people are going to look askance at the place I go to church.
Well, I think you ask a fair question. And if I'm an Orthodox, if I pray to the Holy Theotokos to purify my heart, I'm not going to be afraid of what the U.S. government is going to do to me. I mean, that's maybe it's my age and situation, but no, I don't think we ought to live a life of fear. If we're Orthodox, we should be bold and no. As Ronald Reagan used to say, no pale pastels. And also, you need to understand the price of not doing something. I mean, Oliver Cromwell committed regicide and killed hundreds of thousands of people in England, but in Ireland, he exterminated almost half of the population. People like Lindsey Graham have exterminated 1.8 million people, mostly Orthodox Christian. And I think it's time for us to stand up against it. And that includes the Middle East.
Speaking of Cromwell, and of course there was reference earlier to the murder of the imperial family in Russia. It's one of the constants of the revolutionary mind, and we see this in all the three great European revolutions, the English, the French, and the Russian, where the ultimate crime against the created order is regicide, where you take the visible symbol of God's authority in human affairs and you kill him. Maybe you can say a few words about King Charles. You it's a little off topic, but I think it's something that might be of interest to people.
I'll make a little bit of a confession. When we moved back from Washington, I was in Washington 25 years, and I was one who was involved in politics. My wife was kind of apolitical, and she ended up as chief of staff for Ronald Reagan for domestic policy, assistant secretary of the Army for George Bush Sr. And so we kind of got stuck up here. But when we went home, we bought a church because the Episcopal Church had gone woke. And we bought a church from the Baptists, built in 1879, and we called it the Chapel of St. Charles the Martyr. And my children are still Anglican, so we have the Feast of St. Charles the Martyr on January 30th every year. And I'm there. And quite a few Orthodox come from the Orthodox parishes in South Carolina.
And Roman Catholics come as well.
And Roman Catholics do come, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't know. I don't know if that's strictly speaking Orthodox, but certainly.
You're coming next year.
Yeah, I am coming. Well, unless my bishop doesn't allow me to come, I don't know what he's going to say about that.
These bishops can forbid you to come a lot of places.
Well, that's true. Okay. Looks like I have a +1 for the visit there. Well, I think that's all I really had to say on this little Q&A here. What we could, you have something else to say?
I just
Rich?
want to thank my old friend Metropolitan Jonah. Where is he?
Right over there.
Oh, thank you.
Uncharacteristically
Thank you for hosting
to the
this.
left.
It's been grand. And if there's a modern day St. Paul, you're St. Paul, not Billy Mahone.
Okay, now that we've finished the bitch goddess session here, we're going to take a short break here, and then we'll proceed with Q&A with all of the speakers. All the speakers, please come up here now. We'll put a microphone in the middle there on a stand, so when people want to ask a question, just start lining up and first come, first serve. We have actually, with the time we've saved, we got about an hour, a little over an hour for Q&A. So I'm very optimistic about that. So let's take about a 5-10 minute break, and then reconvene in a few minutes for Q&A. Hello. Also, I understand there may be some rush to the restrooms. There are also some restrooms downstairs, so if anybody needs to use those. And again, oh, and by the way, there are a lot of books and icons and other things along the walls. Please take a look at those now during the break or quietly during the question and answer. Sir.
Αγνή παρθένε δεσποινα, αχράντε Θεοτόκε.
And kill the music, the music. Hello, your attention please. We will resume in 5 minutes. 5 minutes. All the speakers, please come forward. Father John, Vladika, Richard, Jay. Don't make me go through the whole program. You know who you are. Hello, come on, speakers, please. Father Turbo, please take your place. Father Deacon, I think you and I are going to have to stand. Jay Dyer, paging Jay Dyer. Richard. Pardon? Under heel, there you go. Excellent. Okay. Please have a seat. Father Deacon, have a seat. Dissident Mama. Oh, well, hey, why don't you let the lady sing? Right. Stand here with me. Hey, Jada, go ahead. And go ahead and turn that microphone on too. Okay, repeating, we're about to start the question and answer session for all the panelists, all the speakers. So if you have a question, there's a microphone right there in the middle. Walk up to the microphone, form a line, and first come, first serve. What? There are no questions? Все ясно, да? All right. Are we ready to begin? Okay. First question. And please indicate who you're addressing the question to.
This is for Father Turbo. What I've always kind of heard about the quote you had where they talk about being undefeated. The way I've always heard references to the South being undefeated, obviously, like, we can't escape, we surrendered, etc. But what I've heard it more kind of used as is undefeated in virtue, and that was what they had to be proud of. I don't remember who said the line, but there's a quote that I've read. It was along the lines of, though we lost the war, we still have our honor and our virtue. And so I was just wondering, obviously you said you're not an expert on the topic, but what would you say kind of in response to that?
There's a way in which you can begin to understand larger ideas. You break it down smaller. Someone said, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. Well, in order to understand larger constructs, you have to start sometimes in the micro. So in other words, you begin where how an individual begins. And so in that sense, if there's a misunderstanding and you are approaching this understanding from a Christian perspective, then what you'll do is you'll seek to win your brother. St. Silouan the Athonite, he says, my brother is my life. And so what that means is he takes a understanding, a kenotic, which means self-emptying, understanding. And so in that sense, if there's a misunderstanding in regards of the way that's interpreted, then it's up to you to give someone a proper understanding of what that means. But if you don't do it in a Christian manner, you're just going to foment further disagreement. You got to win your brother first. You understand what I'm saying? And so we can have a whole lecture. I can give you a whole lecture if you want on how to win a brother. But the reality is that's the piece. So even though you may understand it that way in the sense of we didn't lose a war because of this and that, I think there's plenty of people who maybe don't understand that that's the way that you understand it, right? So when you encounter it, how are you going to deal with it? Are you going to address it and meet fire with fire, or are you going to, fight fire with water, right? So it's not so much in what you respond, but maybe even how you respond to it. Does that make sense?
I was more asking. That was good. Thank you for that. I meant more like the message of your talk earlier. Like, would that change how you, if let's say you understood it that way going in, would that change how you kind of talked about that specific portion of it? Being
well, if you look
undefeated,
back to the quote that I gave, which was from Lee, and I think that there's reasonable sense that someone interprets it the other way. And so, sure, that can be helpful to say we didn't lose the war in regards to virtue, but I didn't come to destroy the gallantry of the Confederate legacy. It's to purify it. So there's a big difference. So if it is virtue, then very good. Let it be based on where there is virtue and where the virtue was found and where the virtue can be maintained. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I agree with the general sentiment of your talk, and thank you for that. And I like the royal path as well. So
thank you.
It's good to talk to you.
Nice to talk to you too.
And again, address one of the speakers, but if other speakers want to jump in too, feel free.
Hello, my question is for Father Qualls. Father Qualls, thank you for being here today and for engaging in this conversation. Among the many things that you listed as, the way that the South collectively remembers the Civil War and the Confederacy, one factor that was missing that I think would be interesting to bring up is the South's right to self-determination. I think for many Southerners, that's really at the core of how we view the Civil War, how we view our ancestors. And we think about it from the standpoint of people, nation groups, political units have the right to have governments that are reflective of their interest. And when you go back to the 1860s, you look at not just how the North and South disagreed on issues like slavery that we focus on today, but pretty much on every national issue, national banks, trading policies and tariffs, the scope and size of the federal government, foreign policy like the War of 1812. New England nearly seceded because of that. And we think about it in that context, when the South realized the winds were changing so much, that the co-equal balance of North and South that had maintained since the beginning of the Union was beginning to weaken, that was their chance, that was their moment to assert their nationhood and to have a government that truly reflected their ideal and their people as a nation. And so when we think about that struggle that the South maintained, which was really a continuation of the struggle of their grandfathers for the right of a people to have a government that reflects their interests, and we think of that continuing struggle today, how national identities shape who we are, how they shape our values, how they shape our basic interests, how can we not only use nationality to, how can we not only use orthodoxy to strengthen our nations and our cultures, but how can we use our nations and our cultures to strengthen orthodoxy, particularly in relation to the United States and our identity today, our shared identity as Americans?
Well, you said a lot there, but I think the first thing is I come from a perspective which is going to be unpopular, which is we don't strengthen orthodoxy at all. Orthodoxy strengthens us. And that's a full stop. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. And that's part of the problem, is that people want to mingle clay and iron. And so if you're not willing to give Christ everything, I don't know what to tell you. That's my perspective on that. In regards of states' rights and secession, nation, and all the good stuff, it's great. I wasn't arguing it. That's part of the history. What I was saying, thank God it was recorded, because like I said, everyone was busy looking at, well, not everyone, but people are busy looking at me and not hearing what I'm actually saying. So I'd encourage you to go back and actually listen to what I said, because I knew I threw out a lot. But I wasn't talking about tearing down a legacy at all, but rather having it in the crucible of the church. And that's difficult, because it's difficult for individuals, right? Christ is going to call you on your ego. He's going to call you on all the areas in which you are broken and weak, and you think you're strong and you stand, but you don't. And you're going to fight him and you're going to wrestle with him. But like Jacob, when you're ready for the blessing, he'll touch your hip and you'll be wounded. So all the facts and all the dates that you threw out, that's kind of why I'm here, I think, because you're putting something up above something else. My whole point was, all those things are fine and great. How do you now take that narrative and offer it to Christ so that it can be baptized? Because here's the thing, when you give Christ anything, you have to give it with an open hand, and you can't say to him, I'm going to keep this, you can take that. You have to give him everything. And when he gives it back to you, as he gives it back to you, that's the truth. That's what's left. So all those points you made, that's great. I think that everyone here, all freedom-loving Americans, I know I love my freedom. I'm all for it. Gabriel Prosser loved his freedom, right? So we would agree on that. How do you reconcile those things, right? These things are reconciled in the mind of God in his judgment. All that we can do is live the best that we can, an authentic life of the cross. So there's no disagreement there. You're wrestling with a different argument from my perspective.
Itself in different cultures, and the unique saints, the unique stories that play out in that context, I think you can say that there is something that culture does add to orthodoxy. It doesn't change the essentials, it doesn't change the doctrines, but it does enrich the overall Christian story.
No, my dear brother, you don't understand. When the church, when Christ comes into the life of a person and of a nation, the nation and the person doesn't add anything to the church. What it does is the Lord transforms and baptizes those experiences, and then those experiences, what's left, are used to help to bring others. God is sufficient in of himself. He doesn't need us. The church doesn't need us. The church doesn't need you. We receive from God. He gives us, the church gives us, the church baptizes us. And this is part of the problem that I'm trying to address here, obviously, so thank you for showing it. Don't be so concerned about what you're going to lose. Just give it to God. Don't say, well, we do this for the church, we do that. No. Flip it and have some humility and say, what will the church do for us? How can we receive? This is the difference. Again, you don't understand. You think there's no argument here. All those points are fine, but they're not something that's going to make the church more glorious. It's going to be something that redeems you and redeems what you're talking about, not the other way around. It's not the same thing.
Agree, but I'm going to pass it off to the next questioner.
Then become a
As to not waste
Christian.
time.
Thank you, Dylan. Yeah, let's try to keep it more of a question than a discussion. Thank you.
Hi. I have a question addressed for Jim.
Oh.
In regards to when you're talking about, I guess, the alienness of, is it the introduction of Orthodoxy into America, and I guess the public perception in this time of how foreign Orthodoxy could look to the average American who hadn't heard about Orthodoxy before. Do you feel like, or I guess do you perceive that there's this yearning for native expression that I guess embodies the American spirit more so than, perhaps the immigrant roots that are a part of our history with, the Russian missionaries in Alaska, and also the Greeks and the Antiochians coming in as well. What is your perception on that?
Well, I guess I put it into context of what you might call cultural diffusion. I mean, when St. Paul preached on Mars Hill in Athens, you didn't hear Dionysius, the Areopagite, saying, well, listen, Rabbi Saul, I'm with you on all this resurrection stuff, but, all this Jew stuff, no, I'm a Greek, I don't want that. You can't do that. I mean, obviously, when the faith spread from its, Israelitic roots, that was alien to people like the folks in Athens in terms of its ethnic and historical origins, but they somehow made it fit into their civilization. They somehow were able to reconcile their culture to this revelation, and the same thing that happened when it spread to the other countries, first within the Roman Empire and then outside of the Roman Empire. But there's a limit to that. Like, for example, there are some things about Christianity that are just inherently stamped with the civilization and culture of the ancient Mediterranean, Eastern Mediterranean. I mean, the Eucharist is bread and wine. It's not tortillas and pulque or tea and rice, right? I mean, we know there's some things that you can acculturate and some things you can't. So I guess what I'm saying in the context of America, and I'll be blunt about this, which is coming apart at the seams, culturally, just socially, is just falling apart. There's got to be some way where we can sort of surf that wave, where our otherness, in terms of a religion that came here ultimately through immigrants, but immigrants like me who've been here for over 100 years, if you go in just my family, that it stops being an immigrant church. It still has the origins, just like St. Paul preaching to the Athenians, but nonetheless, they embrace it, and it becomes not only consistent with their own idea of who they are, but maybe a big supporter of it. It was mentioned by somebody earlier. What would Greece be without 2,000 years of Christianity? I mean, you can't even imagine what its culture would be today, and the same thing is true to a shorter historical period for the other Orthodox countries. So I think that's something we have to wrestle with, and that's why I kept trying to drag out of Richard, is where are the lines? And I don't know where the lines are, and maybe there are no lines. Maybe all the lines are fuzzy. One quick thing I would microphone.
if it's okay.
Yeah, please, microphone.
Yeah, quick thing I would add is,
It's not on.
okay.
Okay.
One quick thing I would just add is Paul preaching to the Athenians, he quoted from a Greek poet, "In him we live and move and have our being," as he was talking with them. So I think that that's a good example of trying to help with apologetics. And just one other thing, thinking about my Catholic relatives, going back 100 years, there were Irish Catholic churches, there were Italian Catholic churches, and so forth. Then they became known as Roman Catholic churches, which, as I noted, is still something that can seem foreign, but it does indicate a tradition. So somewhere there's a line there between indicating ethnicity, signaling ethnicity in an exclusive way, and signaling tradition in a way that you're part of a deep tradition. Personally, I think it's, we have Russian Orthodox on our church sign. I think that's okay because I think we're pretty much an all-American convert church. We're signaling that we're part of a tradition. So anyway.
Ladika would like to add something to it.
Okay. You need the mic.
It's on.
It's okay, very good. One of the things I would like to add, I'm very proud of my German heritage, and my family's been here for 180 years, and I joined the Russian Orthodox Church. I learned Russian, have friends over there, but I'm an American. And I'm enriched by these other cultures. I'm enriched by the Russian culture, which I've gotten to know very, very closely. I'm enriched by Greek culture and Arabic culture and Romanian and so on and so Serbian. And I think this is one of the things that we can look at. I like to kid that because our parish is so incredibly diverse, that what it does is it makes for a nice potluck. If it was just covered dish Methodist, Sunday dinner, that gets pretty boring after a while. So we have our nice Ethiopian lady who cooks wonderful things, and all sorts of. But this is part of the nature of American culture. It's synthetic. The diversity is so immense. And the reality is, whether we are new immigrants or whether our families have been here for 200 years or 400 years or 15,000 years, we're all immigrants on one hand. On the other hand, we're all Americans. And if we can come together as Americans and rejoice in that common heritage and share the unique things that we have from our many, many, many different backgrounds, what does it do but strengthen our unity? And what does it matter, ultimately, what language the services are in? Now, we're not going to attract many people if we're serving in Slavonic or in classical Arabic or classical Greek or whatever. But it's still an enrichment, and it gives us this kind of much broader sense of being citizens of the world, but particularly of our own country, which is unique in its synthesis of all of these different cultures and all of these different traditions. So I think we need to give thanks to God for all of the diversity of the Orthodox community, and be, and be enriched and be encouraged for all of these different traditions. How many churches now have become pan-Orthodox? In other words, You'll have a cherubic hymn from Russia. You may have a Trisagion from Greece. You may have something else from Arabic, all these different cultures, all these different traditions. And it's beautiful. And there's a harmony there beyond anything. So let's give thanks as we feast at the massive potluck of the kingdom of heaven, and that we have so much to share and so much to be grateful for.
Oh, thank you for your comment, Your Eminence. I guess sort of what I was thinking was, I think we're all thankful for this unique experience that we can share in, all these different cultural inputs that had a part to play in the formation of our faith here in America. But I'm wondering if there's, I guess, do you perceive that our experience of, I guess, our cultural experience, would it always remain a potluck? Or do you think there's something that I guess would arise that's very uniquely American, and it just
I want to jump in because this will tie into the last gentleman. America is not the church. And so what that means is, in regards of speaking of a potluck, this is appropriate for America. But what is the problem in our country? It's the same problem as it is in the UK, is that you need to become an American. You need to be grafted in and assimilate to becoming an American. And then when you actually become an American, then whatever you're bringing to the table, by default, is of value. But you have to first become an American. How much more so in regards of the church? There's a meta culture. When you look at every expression of the church throughout history on every continent, there's a meta culture, which is a through line that all the churches experience. It's a heavenly culture. It's expressed par excellence in Byzantium, but it's still a heavenly culture.
Right.
So Jim gets one. Great. So my point is, when we fast, I don't fast from hamburgers because I hate them. I don't fast from marital relations because I hate my wife. I fast because I'm trying to ascend to something higher. And if you don't understand that, then what is our faith? And that's one of the things is, Orthodoxy is distinct from everything else. That was what I was trying to point out with Saint Sophrony. But in order for everyone else to see that, the Orthodox first have to understand what that means, that Orthodoxy is distinct. And in order for that to happen in this pluralistic context, that means that people who are coming from a pluralistic nation have to find their synthesis in the higher culture, which is the church. But if we're acting like we're doing the church a favor, no one's going to see that. This is the thing. It's hierarchy, right? It's a hierarchy of order, of value, of meaning.
Next question, please. No, the person.
Yeah, hey, good afternoon. I'll address this question to Protodeacon Patrick because he had the ortho-bro topic, but I'd be interested to hear anyone's perspective, maybe also dissident mama with the female lens on this. But I was fortunate enough to have already been married before becoming an ortho-bro. I've noticed a lot of young guys coming to the church, though, that I think they're a little discouraged with the fact that there's a gender imbalance, and when they're searching for a wife, I've seen a lot of guys that have frustration. I think part of that frustration is because they're looking for a fully formed trad wife that already has all the right political and theological understandings. My observation is that there's a lot of young single women in Catholic and Protestant churches that have a desire to serve God. They would be willing to submit to a husband and follow him as a spiritual lead. I guess I was asking, what is some thoughts about some of the young men coming into the church still seeking a partner that might be outside of the Orthodox Church if they're unable to find an Orthodox wife that wants to bake sourdough all day?
Yeah. This is what it means to be a man. You have to compete for a wife. You have to make your way in the world, be able to support one, demonstrate that you're a man enough to make enough money to support a family. Not everybody's going to win at that. Not everybody's going to really apply themselves to it. But that's the fact. Now, coming into the church where a lot of men, that's a good thing. Because if there are a lot of men and they're there for the right reason, because they believe in Christ, in the Orthodox way, and this wonderful community we have, then the men will be better men, and they will attract better women. The women will come. Men need to be the leaders into the church. You can't expect, Eve to save Adam. The fall happened the other way. Adam following Eve, and that's what you don't want to do. So be the leader, come to the Orthodox Church, and yes, there are good women outside the church who can be led into the church. The women it's natural in them to really want to follow somebody, follow a man, and have him take care of her. Now, of course, she has to give up something for being taken care of, but that's actually how they're naturally inclined, as long as they're not talked out of that by the world there. So don't limit yourself and whom you date just to people who are already Orthodox. It's great if you can do that. Both my daughters married somebody in church. My son didn't, though. My son met somebody online, and within a year of them being married, she became Orthodox. She followed him. My wife followed me into the church, agreeing that we be received at the same time. So that can be done. So don't let that discourage you, but man up, because you're going to have to work at it, and that should be your focus as a young man. Establishing yourself as a career in your occupation, being serious, a serious man, and not a man who wastes his time playing games. I have one hobby that I've ever been able to actually indulge in, and that's fishing. And I didn't take it up until I retired, because that's the first time I had time to do it, raising a family. So put aside the games and the enjoyment, focus on your job and your career so that you can then attract a wife. Yes, and they're out there. I'm sure the church is growing. Many more women will be coming as well. At least a quarter of the people I've catechized are women. They're all ages. Some beautiful young girls. One was here. I think she left. Very beautiful young girl. But anyway.
Well, I have 3 sons, 2 16-year-olds and an 18-year-old, and I'm very concerned about this. But I think my husband has talked to some people. He was actually thinking of coming up with an app that would kind of help families put together Orthodox youth of marrying age. So it wouldn't just be like a singles thing, but it would be families coming together, because we know that when the families get together, they can support the marriages, because marriage is hard enough if the families do get along, but you don't want the families not to get along. But that is not utopian, but he talked to enough people who are like, that sounds like a great idea, but in practice, it's just probably not going to happen. And he talked to a particular matushka, however you want to pronounce it, and she said the best thing for young men to do is to find a good Protestant girl and convert her. There are a lot of them. And I think a lot of people think that Orthodox women, if they came in early or if they're, cradle, whatever, all women in America have a strand of feminism, even the ones like me who don't want to. We do. It is ingrained in us. It is part of this poisonous culture that we have been a part of, me since 1971. So I would say, yes, do that. And just because somebody's Protestant and not Orthodox doesn't mean they will have any less or more baggage than somebody else. But that's where we're at. We have to be realistic. And I say that to my children, and that's my husband's advice to them as well.
We have several more people with questions, so let's try to keep the answers short and not have double tap questions if we can avoid it.
All right, thank you.
Oh, that was my question too, so thank you.
Hello, thanks all of you for coming today. It's been awesome. I'm sure I'd like to hear everybody's opinion on this, but I guess I'd address it to Vladika and maybe Jim as well. I feel like there's a correlation between the way non-Orthodox see Orthodox as a strange or Eastern thing. I feel, and I'd wonder if you'd expand on this, I feel kind of the same way being, so we go to a church in Chattanooga, St. Bartholomew's, which is ROCOR, Western Rite. Not a lot of people know that there's ROCOR Western Rite or Western Rite Orthodox in general, but I think Antiochian's probably bigger than ROCOR in that regard. So I was just wondering kind of your view on the Western Rite, and I think it ties into a lot of things we've talked about here today as far as cultural influence on the church and importance of maintaining those things and being American and being Orthodox. Kind of the way I've viewed it is Rome stole Roman Orthodoxy from us, and I think there's something to be said for bringing it back and in a uniquely American way. So I was wondering what your opinion would be on that.
I was actually thinking about something like this, not in terms of Western Rite, but we've had a lot of people come into our congregation and going into being catechumens who have no religious background. So the Eastern Rite, Western Rite doesn't matter. The Latin Mass is equally alien to a Slavonic or a Greek liturgy. But it's not, but if this is what Christianity is, and they're seeking Christianity, they're seeking Christ, it's not alien. It's just not, it's just different. And people are used to difference. I think the Western Rite, I'm a supporter of the Western Rite, has been aimed at alienated Anglicans and Roman Catholics primarily, and it's had some good success in some places, in other places not so much. Right near here in Bealton, there's a tremendously successful Western Rite parish. It all depends on the cultural background you're talking about. You go into a Roman Catholic or a Lutheran or Episcopal church from being a Baptist, that's alien. You go from a Russian Orthodox church to a Protestant church, and that's alien. Anywhere you go, there's going to be a learning curve. Of course, with the Eastern Rite, there are many different presuppositions that are different than in Western culture. But it's not, I think if you push the idea that, oh, it's going to be alien, that you're trying to dissuade people from going there. Whereas in reality, it's just different. It's just something new that you don't know. And quite frankly, is there something distinctly culturally Eastern about the liturgy of St. John Chrysostom? No. Or is there something distinctly and culturally Western about liturgy of St. Gregory? Not really. If you've never seen it, it's new. But it's something, both traditions are equally Orthodox. And so we just look at it as a challenge. to how to understand the perspective that is being conveyed through the text and through the tradition. So,
I agree with my bishop. Next question.
Out loud. Question for Rebecca. Somebody was killed by a socialist in 2007. I didn't catch the name of.
Test. Saint Ilya the Righteous of Georgia, the patron saint of the nation of Georgia.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for speaking. It's been a fun conference. And if anybody wants to know, I'm Reader Steve Miroy, English by birth, Virginian by the grace of God, and Russian Orthodox by faith. Thank you.
So thank you all for coming. I have just two quick questions. One to Father Turbo, but also kind of to the panel. I think I understand what you're going for, Father Turbo, with your presentation. So to kind of give you a chance to, and others to provide examples, are there other saints, writings, things from our tradition that kind of exemplify what you're going for in your talk?
Can you give the second question too, so we can answer it
Yeah,
together?
and I guess the second question is for you, Jim. The second question is, wouldn't you agree that maybe for helping address some of the feelings of, foreignness, it would help to kind of pull from the saints that, I mean, a bunch of us are English, German, Celtic, whatever. We've got a bunch of saints from our history that we could pull from for that. And those are my questions.
I think starting with the Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, who was a failure. His mission failed in regards of an earthly sense. His followers conquered nothing, took nothing, except for the hearts of mankind. If you've ever read the Synaxarion, if you've ever read the prologue, show me which martyr wins by conquering his foes. So every single martyr in the Synaxarion, the prologue, is that example.
As far as if I understand your question correctly, digging more into, if you will, into our Western heritage and making that more front and center, I think you already see some of that. I mean, like, for example, it used to be everybody wanted to be named when, Christodoulos or Theophylactos or Vladimir or something like that when they became Orthodox. And now it's more common to take names like, Ambrose or, something, Augustine. I think one bishop said, let's not take it too far. Let's not have any, St. Elvises out there. But it turns out there is a St. Elvis. I believe he was the one who consecrated St. David of Wales. So a lot of these Western heritage personality, saints clearly, are people we should be putting front and center. I don't know what else we do other than things like names, but I'm sure there are things like that. And I think, back to the Western Rite question, I do think we have to be a little bit concerned that we don't develop sort of an Orthodoxy A, Orthodoxy B mentality. Okay, there's Eastern Orthodox, there's Western Orthodox, and I'm really becoming just like some people today with jurisdictions. Oh, I'm converting to ROCOR. You don't convert to ROCOR. You convert to Orthodoxy, not to the Greek Archdiocese, not to the Serbian diocese, whatever. And I think we have to keep that in mind with regard to Western Rite, Western Orthodoxy. It's all one heritage. We need to find a way to keep it together. And frankly, I think it's one of those things that'll probably develop on its own. Give us 2 or 3 or 4 centuries, it should work out.
Western Rite, I'm Western Rite, and I agree. So thank you so much. Thank you all for coming.
As I lived in Wales for a couple of years as a grad student, one time I was lost and suddenly saw the Church of St. Elvis, and it was in the Preseli Mountains, which is where St. Elvis lived, so Elvis of Preseli, but anyway.
Question?
Hey, everybody. Oh, gosh. Hey, everybody. I'm Father Michael Rossfer Monk at St. Demetrius Monastery. This question was triggered by Father Deacon Brian Patrick Mitchell, but it can be addressed to everybody. So if I put myself in a woman's shoes, a young lady's shoes that wanted to marry a young Orthodox man, I posed the question, well, a lot of the young men in the Orthodox Church are kind of crazy, I feel like. And I'd be freaking out if I have to submit myself, right, to them to be the head of the family, right, or head of me. So I have to follow what they're doing, whether it be, too much internet or autism or whatever it may be that young men are going through. I mean, I'm part of it too, I'm not going to lie. So I'm just saying, like, and it's kind of hinging on Nate's question too, not just getting a job, we have to relate to this other person, right? And have to have a relationship, And men can be kind of like dictator-like, no more using the internet, you gotta get a flip phone now, or whatever, like, they can be quite like overbearing. So how do you as a young woman have the faith to like marry a man? Because she does want to have kids at some point, right? They want to have a family. How are you gonna find somebody, one of the young men, and hope that they're gonna actually become more like compassionate and caring and less like overbearing and like, I don't know.
So you're saying, what does a woman do to attract a good man within the Orthodox Church? That's what you're saying?
Well, I mean, how does the Orthodox Church help like boys or young men become men that can be a head of a household?
Well, a lot of what we're doing now is talking about the man's role and what a man's responsibilities are. And of course, within the church, there's clearly an order there, which is also encourages that. And of course, we have the practice of repentance, confession, all of which was to make you a better man. We have the teachings of the fathers, which of course support marriage in that way. I'm still wondering what, I mean, all of that will make you a better man. There are a lot of good men, however, who never actually get the girl. Because it does require, so you have to be able to offer them something. You have to be able to take care of them. You have to demonstrate confidence more than anything else. They have to believe in you. They won't always believe in you. You can lose their confidence later on, but once they're married, they're sort of stuck with you, at least within the Orthodox Church. But initially, they have to have confidence in you, or it won't happen. So, what else? Is there anything else?
So I think that answers my question, but there's another question about transformation, is that like, whether it's Northern culture or Southern culture, they're pretty strong like cultures, so to speak, right? But within the Orthodox Church, we have to learn, in a sense, to like see from another person's perspective. So how do we transform from that polarized state to being more like understanding of another person's culture, even with just in the North America, and especially within the Orthodox Church? Accepting that there's other ways, so to speak, but also still having our own beliefs without having to have like inflammatory conversations about things that maybe
That's a much broader question. Anyone else
Right.
want to attempt it?
Just back to your first question, very quickly. The parents should be raising godly young men in the church, right? This should show just a confidence in that young man, knowing he is a child of God. And, if he's working for the church, just trying to better himself each day to be a better Orthodox Christian, a better neighbor, a better person, etc. But also, this is true, if a guy seems to like a girl too much, the girl's not gonna like you. That's just a fact. So be cool, and I'm not saying, diss her or anything, but you gotta chill. I mean, girls like the boys that they kind of have to work for. So.
Thank you. Let's go to the next question. Thank you, Father.
Good. I want to thank all the speakers. It's been a great conference so far. I have a two-part question, one for Jay Dyer and one for Father Turbo. I heard Father Turbo speak about dialectics during his conference, and I think that's a very good algorithmic word that keeps kind of popping up behind the scenes. So, Jay, could you comment on the heterodox philosophical history of dialectics and like dyads or that kind of thing? And then Father Turbo, could you comment on the Orthodox theology that kind of solves that dialectical problem, specifically in the iconography of Christ and the divinity and humanity?
Yeah, I think synergy is a key point that a lot of traditions, whether it's like a Protestant tradition or even Roman Catholic traditions or even Islam, really, everything is kind of seen as in opposition or opposites. In a lot of different ways, you can think of faith versus works, Bible versus tradition in Protestantism, Lutheranism. For Luther, for example, in the bondage of the will, the idea that man has free will is somehow a detractor against God's sovereignty and power. And Sunni Islam says the exact same thing. If man had real agency, this would be to detract from God. So everything is either ors in these traditions, and that's usually what we mean when we speak of dialectical oppositions. And so if the answer is how is it reconciled in Christ, you said, Father Turbo.
It's praxis. Praxis is the thing that's missing for most people, and praxis is the thing that takes the kind of intellectual understanding and it transforms you. And so everything from quote unquote what's Palamite theology, which is not Palamite theology, it's just Orthodox theology, to whatever obscure aspect, it all means something, it's all valuable, but it's only experienced in praxis. And so people need to move into praxis, and that's how these things become reconciled and experienced.
Thank you. We only have about 10 minutes left, so let's keep the other questions short and the answers short too, please.
Hello. So my question is for Father John and Father Gabriel. How does a mission begin, and what have you noted that has worked particularly well? I'll say worked. What have you noted that has really, in regards to your own ministry, that has brought more people in? Because I don't imagine that they do like geographical surveys and like who's interested in this county or where should this mission go for it to grow. But what have you noticed that works, I guess?
The key thing is you have to have a group of people, and like I said, sort of a rule of thumb is a minimum of 3 families that are committed to making it happen, and then doing the services is the essential thing. And so if you don't have a clergy, like if you don't have a priest at the beginning, you need to, of course you have to have a bishop's blessing to start a mission, but if you don't have a priest as part of the community right off the bat, you're doing reader services a lot of the time, but that is good preparation for when you have a priest, because you're learning how to do the services. And so that's the most crucial thing, is doing the services and having people who are committed to being part of that, and then letting people know that you're doing the services. That's the beginning. And you also, you need to pray that God's guidance is going to be involved in it, and if you're doing the right thing for the right reasons, then God's going to bless it, and it's going to grow. But it also, like I said earlier, you have to be committed to sticking it out, because there's lots of times when you're going to be thinking, well, I'm wasting my time, but it's only going to seem like that for a while, but you have to get past that. Well, Father Gabriel's left, so I guess it's just me.
After service tonight. Okay, last 3 questions, please. Well, 4 questions.
First of all, thank you so much for this conference. This has been wonderful, and please bear with me. I'm more of a writer than a speaker, so I'm just going to read from this. Yes, sorry. So today, our target audience for Orthodoxy is the traditional and conservative Southern evangelical. Tomorrow, it will be their children who are or tending not to be neither traditional, neither conservative, barely Southern, and hardly evangelical. Orthodox Christian author Rob Dreher frequently recounts a story of a visit to the UK several years ago where he was approached by a gentleman who commented that the biggest concern for the new generation is not the atheism of the boomers, dubbed the so-called new atheism, but of the occult. I see and can personally attest to this reality. Jay has frequently commented on the atheism factories of the modern evangelicalism and its movement, and he rightly warned today of the rise of Islam across the Western world. My question to the whole panel is what, if any, is or ought to be the strategy of Orthodoxy in America to specifically address and target not atheism and Islam by themselves, obviously in addition to evangelicalism and Southern tradition here in the States, but also that addressing that very fertile soil, the soil of occult-grounded modernity, in which these beastly plants sprout forth. Is there or ought there be a ministry or ministerial approach that seeks to address and transform this toxic soil before Lundistan today becomes Virginistan tomorrow? Thank you.
The South becomes increasingly less traditionally Southern as it has been. If we are establishing parishes where we're tapping into Southern culture, that it's not going to be a barrier to reaching the kind of people that you're talking about, because it will be part of the, it will blend with the general culture, even if it's sort of like the remnants of it. But obviously, any clergyman needs to be prepared to deal with people who have been dabbling in the occult. I mean, I encounter people who've been very seriously involved in the occult on a somewhat regular basis. Muslims less regularly that actually come to my church, but I mean, there's certainly many Muslims moving to the area. So we have to be prepared, and that means educating yourself.
Okay. Thank you. Last three questions.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for taking the time for these questions. This might ruffle a few feathers, but I'm going to bring up the topic of veiling, and I'm curious your reflections on this. As a convert, I love to veil as a woman. It's, as I've had it described, what's covered in the Orthodox Church is what is holy. You have the Holy of Holies, you have the Eucharist, you have the Theotokos, the greatest saint of them all. What I found ironic in coming into Orthodoxy is that I found that more converts are veiling more than the cradle Orthodox. And what's even more ironic is that I don't find a lot of priests' wives who are covering their head. And they're the woman, the example of the church, So, but also women aren't talking about it. I don't see women contributors, in Ancient Faith or such, and perhaps I just haven't come upon it, if you could direct me. But I also don't see priest wives, taking this up. Most recently, it's a podcast called Bottom of the Rabbit Hole with Reader Paul, and he had a fantastic reflection on this with Father Peter Heers, driving it home that this is apostolic tradition, and this is always what the church taught. Even in my own friends who are cradle, I'm afraid to bring it up that they're going to get upset with me, So I pose this, why is this such a taboo topic? Because for me, it seems like we're tiptoeing around not upsetting women. And is this, to me, it's also a residual influence of feminism. It's kind of an act of rebellion. It's a refusal to submit. And it's, there's something with pride going on there. And forgive me for not knowing the economia of the church of why, if this has ever happened where they have decided this is okay not to veil, And then is there an opportunity for the women of the church to step up and advocate for this apostolic tradition that when I walk into a church, that's the only thing that I see that I can do is a woman. The men get to be priests. They get to wear the vestments. They get to cense. They get to be in the Holy of Holies. And everywhere you look, with the exception of, St. Mary of Egypt, because reflecting on her past life and prostitution, that's why she's uncovered, But every woman in that church on that wall who are the saints who we look up to, they're all covered. So, yes, why is it such a taboo topic? And then, is this an opportunity for the women of the church to advocate, or is this led up to the men?
Actually, things are a lot better than they were 30 years ago when I converted. So, no, there's been a real improvement. It's not a taboo topic. It's actually talked about. I picked this up today, actually, over there in the corner. It says normalize head coverings. It's got a beautiful little picture of Audrey Hepburn, you know. And I asked the woman, says, well, I certainly agree, but I would, you know, it's a magnetic. I can't put it on my refrigerator. What can I do? And he says, put it on your coffee hours for refrigerator, so everybody in church can see it, and that's what I plan to do. It is talked about, and I'm confident that as things go on, yeah, we're seeing in Orthodoxy a split between the traditionalists and the progressives. The progressives, you're not going to win, but more and more of the traditionalists will begin doing this because it is the Christian custom. It's plainly scriptural. It's just something we always really do, and people just need to be informed, and yes, sometimes the older women need to set the example for the younger women.
Okay, thank you. 2 more questions, and then we have to wrap up. Very slow, very quickly.
Yes, my question's for Richard Hines. So, as many Southerners, modern Southerners at least, I was raised as a evangelical Protestant. A symptom of that upbringing was that I was told and always taught that Catholics and Orthodox ultimately are not Christian, and that there is no salvation for us. Given that mentality, a lot of course, Southerners want to wage war on our brothers and sisters in places like Syria and Russia. What can we do to ultimately curb that mentality, to teach them that we are Christians and that these are our Christian brothers? And then the second part to that question is, as a South Carolinian, how do we get that bastard Lindsey Graham out of office?
Pray and work. Now, it's great to see another South Carolinian here. That we've got several, but yeah, we do need. we are obliged to work. This Protestant idea that they're sold by faith alone. It's just a. I'm not going to use that word again, bitch goddess, but you know, it's a heresy, just like dispensationalism is. And yeah, we just need to say it ain't so, Joe. You know, we need to get out there and talk. You know, I was completely shocked about a week ago. I got this friend who's a garbage can king of North America, got a lot of money. And he's in Miami. He's got 3 or 4 condos and what have you. And so I saw him after church, went to St. Vlad's in Miami, the old church. And he said, may I ask you a question? And I said, what's that, Tony? He said, can I go to church with you next time you're here? And I said, yeah. In other words, I think our Protestant brethren are looking for a masculine religion, a forceful religion, no more pale pastels, bold colors, and that's us.
Thank you. Last question.
Hello. This is for really anybody. So the South, the West, we're all under attack. Christianity. England is all but fallen. We're trying to build an orthodoxy in the South. How can we do that when we have mass migration of people who are not willing to assimilate to the culture that we have that we're trying to foster into orthodoxy? We can't foster it into orthodoxy if it no longer exists. That's my question.
Let me take a stab at it, because this runs across a very difficult nexus between the life of a nation, the life of a family, the life in the world, and defending your country, maintaining its integrity, maintaining its identity, versus the gospel, which belongs to everybody. I mean, it's sort of like the distinction. Look, you want to share your gospel with your neighbor. You don't want people just piling into your house and setting up housekeeping in your house without your permission. So, that's not always an easy line to draw, where you say, okay, fine, we love everybody, but we love you over there, not necessarily coming and camping out in my house. So, and also the fact that our culture has been changed demographically, and we have other different identities other than the original founding identity. Obviously, again, some assimilate, some don't assimilate very much. Some become very assertive of their imported identity, or indeed, look how often, for example, our foreign policy is influenced by various lobbying groups that are not looking out for the American interest, but are looking out for the interests of their own homelands. So these are things we have to contend with in the world, just like, questions of war and peace are very ugly questions that we have to face in the world. We try to do that informed by a Christian ethos and a Christian spirit, but sometimes even in Orthodox countries resort to the sword because they must. And so I don't know where that line is easily drawn. I don't think we can pretend the line doesn't exist or the problem doesn't exist.
We do have to ask for God's help, and may the needs of help not prevail against his church. Where 2 or 3 or more are gathered in my name, there am I also in the midst of them. Sometimes being a little hidden can be a protection. To get back a little bit to the earlier question about like Protestants and not thinking Orthodox or Christians, they think the church has been lost, but God has not lost his church, and he will not allow it to be lost. It's not like his church is on a milk carton like they used to put missing children or something, I mean, this is kind of the Protestant attitude. And there is a contradiction. I'm speaking of Protestants here. You're speaking more, other hostile entities, right? But there is an attitude like, well, the church is invisible, so all Christians belong, except the Orthodox Church, among maybe the Catholics, as well. But pointing out the contradiction of that, pointing out, hey, we are the historical church, we're the body of Christ, and then having some confidence, Philotimo can be, a virtue. Boldness can be a sin, but it can also be a virtue. Getting back to what Jim just said, yeah.
Okay, thank you. That concludes the formal part of the conference. We'll now have a closing prayer from Vladika Jonah, and then after that, I have some instructions for you.